Today I'm starting a new series called Practicing the Presence. And this is a series about how we can become more aware of the God who is always there. The question animating this series is not, do you believe in God? I am assuming that most everyone here does. Now, a question that could be interesting is, what kind of God do you believe in? But that's another question for another time and another series. My assumption is also, because this is a gathering of Christ followers, most of us here have believed in a God who is revealed in and made known by Jesus the Christ, the Son of God. Now, the animating question for this series is, how aware are you of God's presence throughout your day? This is what one writer calls the felt presence of God. And a follow-up to this question is, how is your experience of the felt presence of God, if you have one? And I am not assuming everyone here does, more on that later. But if you do have an experience of God's felt presence regularly throughout your day, what difference does that make in the way you live your life? Because there is a huge difference between believing in God, an idea, a theory, a philosophical construct, maybe even a character you read about in a sacred book. There is a huge difference between believing in God and experiencing God's felt presence. And that distinction may make some of you a bit uncomfortable. And frankly, it makes me a bit uncomfortable. Because I wasn't raised in a church tradition that encouraged me, much less taught me, how to experience the felt presence of God. If anything, I was taught to be suspicious of people who talk too much about feeling God's presence, because you cannot trust your feelings. Why we think we can trust our thoughts, I don't know, but you can't trust your feelings. And like many of you, I was raised in a tradition that valued spiritual information over spiritual experience. And so we spent a lot of time and energy stuffing into our heads information, facts about God. Who God is, what God does and doesn't do, and what God expects us to do and not do, and what God will do to us if we don't do what God expects us to do. And it was easy to come to the conclusion growing up that mastering these facts about God, memorizing this information, studying it, rehearsing it, studying it again, talking about it, sharing it with others, that was the goal of our faith. And spiritual information, loving God with your mind, is good and it's necessary. But knowing facts about God is not the same thing as experiencing the presence, enjoying the presence, taking comfort in the presence, being challenged and transformed by the presence of God. And I've had to learn this lesson the hard way. In my mid-20s, I went through a serious bout of doubt. And this was complicated by the fact that I was already a preacher. There was a painful, distressing season of my life when every day when I woke up, it was a struggle to believe in God. because so much of what I had been taught about God growing up, so many of my unquestioned assumptions about God were increasingly becoming unbelievable to me. No matter how hard I tried, I could not force myself to believe in certain ideas, theories, and images of God. And since for me, God was completely an image or an idea or a theory existing inside my head rather than a felt presence in my life, as those images, ideas, and theories were challenged and dismantled, I had nothing left to hold on to. And I couldn't feel God holding on to me. I had never experienced God's presence the way David describes it in Psalm 139, when he says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and light will become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." Where can I go, asked David, to flee your presence? Where can I go, asked David, to be outside of your presence? The Apostle Paul says something similar in his sermon to the Athenians in Acts chapter 17, when he says in verse 26, "From one man God made all the nations, and that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands." And then he says, God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. For in God we live and move and have our being. I've used this image with you before, but much like fruit can be suspended in a Jell-O mold, we exist in God. Everything that exists within God. Now, this is not pantheism, which says God is in all things. So God is in that rock, and God is in that tree, and God is in that frog. No, this is not pantheism. This is panentheism, if you want to know the technical term for it, which means that all things exist in God. We are never outside of God's presence because we are always in God. In God we live and move and have our being. And so, if we cannot flee from God's presence, because in God we live and move and have our being, why is it then that for some of us at least, God does not feel real? Not always. Why is it for some of us a struggle to experience the felt reality of God, even though looking back on our lives, we can say, I've always believed God exists. But God has not always been a felt reality in my life. Almost 500 years ago, John of the Cross named 2 reasons why we might not feel the presence of God. If God is not real to us, he said, it's usually because of one of 2 reasons. The first reason is on God's side of the street, and that is because God purposefully withdraws God's presence from us. Much in the same way that a parent will strategically withdraw from a child to encourage or maybe force that child to grow to the next stage of maturity, so God will withdraw God's presence from us to stimulate our growth, to challenge our faith. You've heard that parable of the two fish who were swimming along, and one fish says to the other, "So what is all this water I keep hearing so much about?" Because a fish does not comprehend or understand water until it's taken from it. And so God will withdraw God's presence from us to get our attention, to teach us a lesson, to clarify the object of our faith, to help us better appreciate what we are taking for granted. And so God may not always feel real to us because God is withdrawing God's presence from us for a season. John of the Cross called this the dark night of the soul. But the other reason he said is we don't always feel God's presence is because we are blind to God's presence. Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." But it is our divided, conflicted, muddy, impure hearts that cloud our vision and obscure our view of God. God is always present. God is always present. We are always floating in the jello of God. We are always swimming in the water of God. God is always present. But we are not always present to God. The old saying goes, God is no more present in church than in a bar. God is present in both. But generally, we are more present to God in church than in a bar. So there's nothing we can do about God's freedom to withdraw from us for a season to grow our faith. But there is something we can do about our inability to be present to God who is always there. There are some things within our control that can clarify our vision so we can be more aware of God who is always with us. In his book, The Shattered Lantern, Ronald Rolheiser names 3 primary impediments to the felt presence of God. And this is on our side of the street. This excludes the dark night of the soul. The first, he says, is we are not more aware of God's presence all around us because we are self-absorbed. We reduce life to a series of statements beginning with the word my. My goals, my dreams, my hopes, my troubles, my concerns, my worries. Rolheiser writes that when we are excessively self-preoccupied, we tend to see nothing beyond our own heartaches and problems. And so our sense of reality shrinks accordingly, and it is not then surprising that we have trouble believing in the reality of God or experiencing the felt presence of God, since we have trouble perceiving any reality beyond ourselves. Years ago, when we lived in the Pacific Northwest, in my mid-20s, as I was going through my season of doubt, one day I went for a hike on a trail that took me through a forest of Douglas fir trees that formed a canopy over an undergrowth of lush green ferns. And occasionally, this trail would open up on the side of the mountain and give me a view of the Puget Sound with the San Juan Islands in the distance. So I'm overshadowed by huge Doug fir trees. There's this carpet of lush green ferns behind me, and I'm turning and I'm looking out at the sound, and I see the islands in the distance. I lived here. And for a boy who grew up in West Texas, where tumbleweeds outnumber ferns 100-0, this was paradise. And I know from my 6 years living there that this is the kind of awe-inspiring beauty that makes your heart ache. And it makes it easy to reach out for something beyond yourself. But on that day, when I was so overwhelmed with doubt, when my soul and heart and mind were so troubled, I did not see any of this. I missed it all. I didn't look up. I wasn't looking around. I was looking down. Because I was stuck inside my head. And I was focused only on my troubles, obsessed with working out my doubts, which were all inside of me. Sometimes we are blind to God's presence because we are so self-absorbed that we are not aware of all the signs pointing us to the presence of God around us. And so God is not real to us because the only thing that is real to us, and we make it so, is ourself. We are self-absorbed. Rolheiser also says another impediment to the felt presence of God is we are busy. We are obsessed with our productivity. We have long lists that we must get done. Reminds of this story Jesus tells about a man in Luke 14 who prepared a great banquet and invited many guests. And at the time of the banquet, he sent his servant to tell those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is now ready." And they all began to make excuses. The first said, "I've just bought a field. I must go and see it. Please excuse me." Others said, "I've just bought 5 yoke of oxen. I'm on my way to try them out. Please excuse me." And then another said, "I just got married, so I can't come." They all miss out on the party, the banquet. They all miss out, Jesus' point, on the kingdom of God, which means they miss out on God because they have too many things, often good, necessary things, to do. And in the same way that leaving too little time for sleep robs us of an opportunity to dream, so our busyness can blind us to the presence of God all around us. And then the third impediment, Rolheiser says, we are restless. And our restlessness manifests itself as impatience. We do not like to wait for anything. And I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse. Increasingly, we don't have to wait for anything. Do you remember long time ago when next day shipping was a luxury you would pay a little extra for? Now it is a hardship compared to same day delivery. And when we are forced to wait, our restlessness, our impatience immediately prompts us to distract ourselves so that we don't get bored, which is like the worst thing ever. And fortunately, we have in our pocket and then easily in our hand a little device that provides infinite distraction so that we never, ever have to endure a quiet, still, boring moment in which we might encounter the presence of God, in which we might hear the voice of God speaking to us. Now, when the God we believe in doesn't feel real to us, our temptation is to blame God for it, to assume God is the problem. Why does God make it so hard? Why does God hide from us? Why doesn't God make God's presence more obvious to us? Why is God always playing these games with us? But most of the time, God is not the problem. We are. God is not hiding from us. God is not far away. God has created and ordered the world in such a way so that when we reach out for God, we will find God. God is not hiding from us. We are hiding from God. Just like in Genesis 3, verse 8, when the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, they hid from the Lord among the trees of the garden. But the Lord called out to the man, "Where are you?" We don't ask that question of God. God asks that question of us. Where are you? I love the way Jewish theologian Abraham Heschel puts it, and I'm paraphrasing him, when he says the Bible is not the story of humanity's search for God. The Bible is the story of God in search of humanity. And so today I invite you to consider the possibility that our self-absorbed, hyper-busy, endlessly restless, constantly distracted lifestyles are nothing more than our species' latest and greatest attempt to hide from God. And if it is possible to organize our lives in such a way so that we are actually hiding from God, it's also possible to reorganize our lives in such a way so that we can be more present to God. So that when God asks, "Where are you?" instead of hiding, we can say, "Here we are. We're over here." And in this series, over the next several weeks, I'm going to offer several suggestions, some practices that we can incorporate into our lives that will allow us to stop hiding and to show up in God's presence. To stop hiding and instead show up. And I'll close today with one of the best, time-tested ways to show up to God's presence. This practice is so easy to explain, so simple to demonstrate, and yet so challenging to practice with regularity. Are you ready? I don't even think you'll need to take notes. No need to take a snapshot of this with your phone. No videos, please. I want you to pay attention and capture it with your eyeballs. But this is one of the absolute best ways to practice being in the presence of God. Are you feeling your restlessness kick in yet? As the Lord says in Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." In a conflicted, noisy, violent, chaotic world, be still and know that I am God. And your mission, should you choose to accept it this week, is to spend at least 5 minutes, more if you can, 10 would be great, at least 5 minutes being still, being silent, being quiet in the presence of the Lord. And perhaps in the still and in the quiet, you will become more aware of the God who is always there. Let's close by standing and reading Paul's words, which I read earlier. But it's the theme verse or theme words, anchor words from this series. Let's read these words together from Acts 17. We'll let this be our closing reading. Let's read out loud. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. May you be aware of this week. Go in peace.